Greetings, viewers, and welcome to Eric the Car Guy. 'Tis my show, where I try to walk you through some of the common repairs you might run into in your life. And today, we have a 2001 Honda Odyssey. It has a 3.5 liter engine in it, if that matters to you, and a new transmission. In order to bring this car into the best shape it can possibly be in, my wife drives this, along with my kids. I want it to be in good shape. During the course of some recent repairs, I discovered that the dampers on this vehicle weren't doing too great. I found one of the front struts leaking, and I found one of the rear shocks or dampers leaking also. So I said to myself, why don't you do something about that? I mean, you've done all this other work, you might as well take it the rest of the way and cross that finish line. Well, here we are today, and I'm going to split this up into two parts. I'm only going to do the front struts in this video, and I'm going to do the rear shocks in another video. That way you get a chance to, take a little break, grab some popcorn in between. During the course of this video, I will show you what I saw that basically gives me reason to believe that these dampers are in need of replacement. I'll walk you through that process. But I also want to just put this out here right now. In my experience, working on Hondas, and I have done so for almost 20 years now, I have found the best dampers to be the original equipment struts from Hondas. And that's what I'm using today. Do you have to do what I'm doing? No. There are plenty of other good aftermarket stuff that's out there that you can purchase and do the exact same thing I'm doing here today. The Honda stuff is expensive, I'm not gonna lie. Try to find an online source is probably gonna be your best bet in that sense. But I wanna preface this video by saying that in my experience, nothing rides better, nothing lasts longer than the original equipment struts. Don't know what kind of voodoo they used when they made them, but this van has about 150,000 miles on it, and these are the original struts, and this is the first time I'm having to deal with them. And I'm not suffering with ride quality so much as I'm beginning to see leaks. So that should tell you something about the original equipment parts. Now, are they the do-all end-all? No. But they're what I prefer, and that's why I'm using during the course of this video. You can use whatever you like. However, I will walk you through the steps of replacement starting now! We begin our journey, or our Odyssey, by opening the hood. In addition to that, I'm also going to insert the key into the ignition and just click it one stop into the accessory position. I don't want all the lights in the dash and everything on. I just want to make it so that the steering wheel is unlocked so that I can move it back and forth. And while we're here, let's also set the parking brake. This next step you can take in one of two directions. Honda was kind enough to put these little access plugs, which you can just pick out here, that lead to the upper fasteners of the strut. They were kind enough to do this for us. However, they're kind of difficult to, say, put the nut on here when you are going to go and reinsert the strut. So actually what I'm going to do, what you could do at this point is remove this, this, and this to gain access to those fasteners. Or you could remove the windshield wipers and then remove this whole upper cowl. Or, this is what I'm gonna do. We call it the flat rate way. I'm just gonna take this little rubber seal up and I'm just gonna lift up this part of the cowl so I can sneak my hand up in here. So I am going to remove all of these plastic plugs on both sides, mind you. Don't worry, that's normal. So I'm gonna open these up like this, but I'm also going to remove this weather strip here so I can sneak my hand in here so I can get the nuts on there, but I'm going to access tightening the nuts through these holes. I'm going to do this to both sides. These are all the same size, so don't worry too much about getting them all back in the same hole that they were in. I'm actually going to take these and put them up here by the windshield wiper. They'll live happily there because when I start lifting up on this, it's going to move things around, perhaps enough to lose those, and I don't want to lose them. Now what I've seen some guys do is just come in here and lift up on this cowl. And that works, honestly, but what you can do also is, you'll see it's held in by these little plastic clips. You can come in underneath this area, I use these angle pliers, and sort of squeeze these together so that you can release them. You can do it that way also. put this someplace where you won't lose it. I'm gonna throw mine up by the windshield wipers. Okay, I'm gonna set it over on the bench. Now let's raise it up and put it on some jack stands. Because I know someone will ask where I am placing my jack, I will show you. We'll see here this cross member that runs. Actually, you've got one on that side and one on this side underneath the transmission here. So I am going to place my jack actually a little bit farther back, right about there. I'm trying to hit just about where the lower control arm connects to it. That's where it's strongest. I'm going to lift up there. And for those of you wondering what's on the floor, that's condensation from the air conditioning dripping down. It's not something to be concerned about at all.
The jack stands themselves will be placed right here on these. These are the lift points for the vehicle. So the jack stands are going to go right under here. That's why I'm not putting the jack here, because I need to put the jack stands in this area.
For the next part, I'm going to use my safety glasses. Now I'm going to take the wheel off. Now I'm using an impact. If you're having to use hand tools to do this, remember to break the lug nuts loose on the ground before you raise it up. Like my new brakes? Yeah, they're cool. I put those on last week when I installed the new transmission. I didn't do a video on that because I've done plenty of videos on installing disc brakes. It's all pretty much the same. But let's talk about why we're here. Check this out. You see that residue on the outside of that strut? There's nothing here that can cause an oil leak other than the strut itself. And when struts begin to go bad, the seals begin to leak out, and this is what you get. So if you see this residue like this or worse, it's time to replace that strut. Okay, now let's talk about our plan of attack. We have a few things that are attached to the strut that we need to remove in order to remove the strut assembly, or as some of you might refer to this as a damper assembly. Either one's good. We've got a 12mm here that holds the brake hose onto a flange on the outside. In addition to that, we have these two large fasteners passing through the upper knuckle here that we need to remove to get this part of the strut off. And back here we have a stabilizer link. In addition to that, we've got this ABS wire here that has an attachment to the back of the strut here with what I believe to be a 10mm fastener. So we're going to need to undo all of those things in order to free our fastener from its mount here. Let's cover that in detail now. Before we get too deep into the rabbit hole here, let's do something smart. I'm going to take some penetrating oil and hit all the fasteners that we're about to loosen with a little bit of that and let that soak in to start with. I'm going to begin my disassembly here in the back with this ABS wire. I can actually remember the part where we put the key in the ignition? I can actually take this and just grab it with my hands and pivot the whole assembly via the brake rotor. Now that this is out, I believe it's a 10mm. Yep, it is. Be sure to put this someplace where you can find it. Next up is the brake line here, and that one is a 12mm fastener. Normally I just zap this with my impact, but I try to use the tools that you use whenever possible, or you might use. Heck, I don't know what you got. Maybe you got better stuff than me. If you do, awesome. I usually like to use an impact on rusty fasteners because it seems to work the best. An impacting motion. Whenever you try to twist, you notice I hit with the back of my hand there. Whenever you try to twist a rusty fastener, I think you run the risk of breaking it. Hit it with an impact though, and that impacting motion is something that knocks it loose much more easily than a twisting, torquing motion. Now the brake line is loose from the strut. Wiggle this out of here. Or better yet, let me show you a trick. So this bolt's stuck in the socket. Here's all I ever do. I just slam it on the ground a couple of times. And knocks it loose. Heads of these bolts get rusty, and usually, once again, an impacting motion is usually your best friend in this situation. And now we have the stabilizer link. I'm sure many of you have already noticed that I have brand new stabilizer links on my Odyssey. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you're going to replace the struts on this vehicle or similar vehicle, I think this will also work for a Ridgeline and an MDX, buy a set of stabilizer links. Or it might be better to say, make sure the parts store that you deal with has a set of stabilizer links in stock. The reason mine are new is because when I went to remove them, I had difficulty removing them. Now, I have videos on the removal of these stabilizer links. You'll notice that there's an Allen inside here. You can put a wrench around the outside and use the Allen and tighten this, and it will hopefully loosen the nut and come out. Usually these get rusty though, and the Allen just spins on the inside of here, and that doesn't work so well. Sometimes you can put a pair of vice grips on the back side here and hold this rear assembly and then hit these. Like I said, I've got a video on the techniques that I employ to try to get these loose, but I'm going to tell you right now, you will not have the experience you're about to see. And I'm also going to say, once again, if you want to get these loose, an impact is the way to go. If you're not using an impact well, you're probably going to have a much more difficult time with it. The nut is 17 millimeter. Now you understand why I'm doing these struts now, instead of waiting till those get all rusted up again. Now we have these retaining nuts that hold the strut assembly to the knuckle. And make sure that all of your wires and brake lines are out of the way before you loosen these. And I'm not saying that this is going to fall out of here, but just in case it does, you'll be prepared, because actually this through bolt will still be here. These are 22 millimeter on both sides. They're just through bolts. They're not cam bolts or anything like that. They're just regular bolts. So they just hold it on. So I've got a 22 millimeter wrench that I'm going to put on this side. And once again, impacts are your friend in this situation. So I have this 22 millimeter impact that I'm going to blast these off with. Now I employ just this method of pushing on the knuckle, and it pretty much makes it so you can get this bolt out. Sometimes the shank of these things gets rusted up inside of this area. If that happens, you can actually hit this side of it with an impact or with a wrench and spin it around. If you don't have an impact, a breaker bar would be your friend here, just to knock things loose. But once again, the impacting motion of doing things like this is of real benefit when removing old rusty fasteners. Now that things are loose here, let's go up top and remove those 3 fasteners. That way we can free our strut from the body and replace it. When you remove this, you expose these 3 fasteners here. They are 14 millimeter. I'm going to go in through the top, as I stated I would, with my impact to knock those loose. I'm going to give myself a little more access here by opening the hood a little more. And I have this hood prop that I'm going to use to hold the hood up a little bit wider. It's kind of difficult to get to this upper fastener up by this windshield wiper with the hood in the way, so I'm going to lift it up a little bit more to get it out of the way. Now, as you can see, because I did this, the hood was down here, but now it's way up here, and that gives me the ability to get in here. I'm using this looks like a 6-inch extension with this swivel 14 millimeter socket that I'm going to use to loosen these fasteners up. Because I don't want to lose these down in this area, I'm going to take them off by hand and put them underneath the windshield, or up on top of the windshield wiper. The strut is now loose from its mounts, and we can remove it from the vehicle. A word of caution here. Don't let this assembly fall forward too much, because if it does, the inner CV boot or the inner CV joint comes apart and you'll have to deal with that. So to prevent that, just try to position this in such a way to where it's not going to fall forward too much. Here we have our new struts in their boxes. I'm showing you this to show you what the part numbers are, at least for this vehicle. I honestly don't know which one is left and which one is right, but you can see the difference would be the 605 or the 606 would be the difference. Looks like the 606 number is the left, the 605 number is the right. I know this because they're marked left and right.
If you have aftermarket struts, they usually stamp it somewhere. I think this might also be stamped somewhere on the, on this mount right here. You can see an L and an R on the right one. So if you don't have a sticker, you can look down here for the stamp, and that's where the brake line attaches.
A couple of things before we dig in. This is the upper bearing plate, and this will rotate on a bearing back and forth as you steer the vehicle. If you rotate this and you feel some roughness, then it might be a good idea to replace this. The bearings may have gone bad. You'll also hear that before you remove the strut. So if you turn the wheel back and forth and you hear something that sounds like, you know, a bunch of bearings grinding together, well, it could possibly be this upper strut mount. Couldn't tell you which side. Go out, turn the wheel back and forth, and try to put your hand on the top and see if you can actually feel the noise. I'll put a link in the description to a video on finding suspension noises. The other thing I want you to note, I've got this positioned in the vise like this, so it's actually mounted in the vehicle as you see it. But you can see where the lower spring rests down here and where the upper spring rests up here. Now it's not going to change because I know I'm using OE struts, but sometimes on aftermarket struts, the positioning is going to be different because they weld these plates on maybe a little bit different. So your experience may vary, but I try to get the spring back in the same location. You can see where the spring terminates up here. I try to get it back in the same location it was when I took it apart. But now is the fun part and probably the most dangerous part of this whole trip. And some of you see what's coming right there. Let's start with a little bit of penetrating oil up here on this top nut. This is what's holding this whole assembly together right now. And once this comes loose, this whole assembly can go somewhere. This spring is holding up 1/4 of the weight of the vehicle. Once this nut comes off, there's a lot of potential energy here. You don't just zip this off. You need to get something, spring compressors. Now, I bought my spring compressors before they came with these little safety latches that could come on here. And regrettably, I don't have those to show you here. Hopefully the set that you buy will have these safety latches. But just a word of caution, this is the most dangerous part of this job. If it's not done correctly, you could be hurt, seriously injured, or even killed, if I'm honest. Like I said, this is holding up 1/4 of the weight of the vehicle. So you need to do this carefully, and you need to make sure that you don't hurt yourself. Now these wider springs like this, these big springs, and not the little tight coils like you'd find on older Accords and things like that, those springs with the tight coils, those are the ones to really watch out for. These wider ones are not so bad, but the bigger ones, yeah. And also look for, you know, any cracks in the spring itself. The spring may be broken. If the spring's broken, might as well replace it now instead of waiting till later. But my springs look okay, so I think we can just get away with replacing the dampers and moving on with their lives. But I'm going to install the my spring compressor here, and I'm going to put 2 of them on, one on each side. Mine has a 5/16 nut at the top. And I'm trying to position these in such a way to where I can compress the spring, remove that part of the assembly, install the new strut, and install my spring on the new assembly. That's the game here. So the more coils that you can grab, the better. If you're only grabbing 2 coils, that's not going to be enough. In fact, I'm wondering if what I have here is going to be enough. We'll find out. Something that I didn't show in the other videos that I'm going to show in this video is there is a way that you can secure these spring clips before you start running them down. I'm just going to use some good old-fashioned zip ties. And the reason for this would be, and I'm only going to do this on the top because I don't see this bottom one that has these 2 hooks sliding as much. But the reason for this is this whole compressor assembly could go one way or the other. Now before I go any further, I'll inject one more possibility for you. Rather than going through the trouble of compressing the springs yourself, you could do a couple of different things. One, you can buy pre-assembled struts with the springs already installed and just put those things up in there. That way you don't have to mess with compressing anything. You just have to do the part of the video that I just showed you there and the installation. The other possibility is that you take your strut assembly as is here before the spring is compressed to a shop, have them compress the spring and put on the struts for you. So you've got a couple of options. You don't necessarily have to do this. You can, as I said, buy complete assemblies or take it to a shop and have them swap the struts out for you. But you can save yourself the labor of removing them from the vehicle, which can be a lot more difficult than what you saw me do because, like I said, those stabilizer links, those are where you're going to run into trouble probably more than anything. The crickets are loud today. Now I'm going to tighten the spring compressor down. I'm going to walk it back and forth. I'm going to do one side, then the other side, then one side, then the other side until I get it compressed enough to where I've got it loose enough at the top to where I feel confident in taking this nut off. This nut up here is a 17 millimeter, by the way. As long as that nut's still on the top, if it lets go, it's really got nowhere to go. Once you take that nut off, it's like you just pulled the pin on the grenade. It can go at any time. So, extremely careful at that point. I am getting nervous, as I'm sure you are too. Like I said, either buy complete assemblies or take it someplace and have them use a real spring compressor on this because it makes the job that much easier. That's what I wanted. I wanted just a little bit of movement out of the spring itself to tell me that when I remove this nut up top, that it's gonna come apart okay. It's still not going to be under spring tension. It's going to come flying apart. Once I take this nut off, though, that's the part where we have to move quickly. And, well, not necessarily move quickly, move carefully. I'm okay. But that's the reason why you want to be careful doing this. It's like I'm going to need an upper strut bearing. I got to tell you, this is dangerous, and there probably is a better way to do it. And I could have been hurt doing what I'm doing, and I hate showing you stuff like that. So, word of caution. And also, get the type of these that have the locks, because obviously my zip ties didn't do anything and they just slipped right around. Normally I don't have issues like that, but if you're going to have issues, it'll be when you're getting that nut off. And as you saw, things went flying. Well, I was fortunate enough to, I believe, find all the little ball bearings for my upper bearing plate. We're going to go over and look at those at the parts washer right now. In fact, I'm going to take these parts over there and I'm going to clean them up and so that I can reinstall them. I believe I can reuse this, so I'm pretty happy about that. But we're going to have some difficulty now that the spring is all like this. We're going to have to loosen those compressors and then get everything put back together and then compress that spring again and hopefully not die and put the whole strut assembly back together and get it back in the vehicle. Yay. Let's go over to that parts washer. All right, I took my little ball bearings and put them inside this little container with a little parts washing fluid. Anytime you get all this dirt on here, and even after doing this, there's still the risk that this may not work out, but got all these bearings cleaned up. I'm gonna dry them off with a rag and everything when I'm done, and hopefully they'll be okay and I'll be able to salvage this bearing. If not, I'll have to do this again and replace the upper bearing. Yay. Clean these other parts out so we can put new grease in. Now we'll get those dried up and get this thing put back together so we can reinstall it. You always seem to get a little bit of extra out of me when I do these videos. I try to show you one thing, I end up screwing it up and having to show you all this other stuff too. My bearings have been cleaned. It was a little stressful finding all those, I'm not gonna lie. I dried everything off with some compressed air. As you can see, that's where the bearing rides. To think that that is basically where your that corner of the vehicle is actually supported. It's right on that thin line there. Just going to use regular axle grease for this. Got quite a bit of it here. And I'm just going to go around the inside of this whole area. I'm going to take each one of my little ball bearings and insert them. I'm going to take a little bit more grease and put it around the inside of here. We have a freshly lubricated assembly. That should be good. Feels quiet. If you feel it grinding or making noise, you got a little bit of dirt in there, and that may eventually equate to being really noisy when you steer it. That's the thing here. I believe this bearing comes separate from this upper plate, so I think you can just buy the bearing. I think I got away with it. I got really lucky in so many ways on that deal. I didn't die for one or lose an appendage. That's a good day. Yeah, I think I'm gonna be all right here. All right, now they marked this front, and that's when we go to reinstall it. That's the part that needs to face front. So we need to make sure that when we do get this back in there, that this one is facing the front of the vehicle. I also have the upper plate, and I was able to find the nut. Now I got to deal with this mess. I'm not excited about this at all. On our old strut, we have this cover assembly, this bumper assembly we're going to have to install. What will happen when these are really bad is you'll take all this stuff off and this piston will slowly sink down into here. When that happens, you know it's done. Do that to me, all right? With no tension on the spring, this is now harmless. It's just a spring. It's when it becomes compressed that that potential energy turns into deadly force, as you've seen. All right, let's try to get this right. Left side, big old L. Don't squeeze this too much. You just want to hold it. You don't want to damage it. That's on there. Our bumper. Our dust cover, maybe. And of course, our spring. I just checked the old one to see if there's a rubber mount on the lower part of this. There is not. It was just spring touching here. But what you may find sometimes is you may find like a little rubber insert here that goes between the spring and this. It helps prevent noise. Good idea to put it there. We're going to try something a little different this time. One thing before I get too committed, this is my upper bearing plate. You can see a witness mark where the spring used to rest, right here. So I want to make sure that when I install this on here, that I install it so that it makes contact with this end right here. So this little notch goes in here. That way you're sure to locate this lower part where it's supposed to go. However, it doesn't matter too much because this is, oh yeah, this wasn't quite on there all the way. This doesn't matter too much because this whole thing will spin. Gonna use something a little more stout than wire ties this time. Gonna use hose clamps. Here's a detail shot of what I'm doing. I'm probably going to take this one off and put it back on so that it is positioned in the same way this other one is, to where this can't move. That's the whole idea here, is to make this so that this can't slide around, which is what happened. So this got to a point and it just slid around, and that's when we had the explosive discharge, if you will. So I'm gonna move this clamp, flip it around like this one, and then we'll get started compressing the spring, and hopefully we'll be able to get it compressed enough to get that upper strut mount on, and then we can move on to the other side. Here goes nothing. All right, I'm gonna have to undo this and redo it. I'll show you why. You can see how this one has slid over a little bit, and as a result, most of our force is being applied on this side, and it's causing the spring not to stay even. So I'm gonna have to undo this, unless I can get the top on, which I doubt, and then start over and then move everything over this way. And I think I'm gonna lock the bottom in too. It's been a while since I've dealt with some that are this difficult, but I guess this is a heavier vehicle, so these are stouter springs. So usually when I do these on cars, I do them no problem, but this one, for whatever reason, it's giving me some trouble. I'm kind of starting to get the impression that this thing's trying to kill me. I'm gonna try a different approach, one that is less lethal. Let's get this stuff apart, get it packed up in the car, and take a little trip. Hey Scott.
Hey Eric.
Can I use your spring compressor?
You can.
That's good. Cool, Scott's gonna let us use a spring compressor. Let's use a real spring compressor this time. Hopefully we won't die.
Safety first.
Safety first. All right, kids, Scott has a real spring compressor. This thing is designed so that you can do what we need to do here. In fact, I'm gonna say if you don't have one of these, don't even attempt it. Buy quick struts or take it someplace that has one of these and have them do it for you. Other than that, I don't know, you might be risking your life. Let's see how this is supposed to work. All right, well, we gotta start by getting the spring mounted inside this assembly. I'm gonna try and grab as many coils as you can, and then get it as straight as you can. Now, as I said before, I want to try to get where that witness mark is on that spring in the same place as it was when it started. There we go. That's in where it's supposed to be. Now we can start squeezing it. And that is the difference between not having the right tools and having the right tools. Watch how easy the other one goes. All right, now watch how easy this one goes using this tool the whole time. long as it's loose in the mount, you're good, but you have the chance of this thing spinning as you're trying to get it out. Hopefully it'll behave. In fact, to prevent that, I'm just going to put a little bit more tension on it to try and hold it, so that way it might spin a little bit less. What a swivel socket, dude. So, Scott has this in his hand, knowing I'm going to need it. Not that he's used this tool before or anything. Now, aside from the nut going away, which I found, and honestly I should replace these, they got nylon locks on the top, but they didn't give me new ones with these really expensive struts I bought. I'm a little disappointed. Take the stuff off the top, take the bumper off. Old strut, you can see a little bit of leakage there. New strut, new bumper, new dust shield. Make sure you get this started by hand before you start running it down, because if you cross thread this, you're gonna have a very bad day. The right tools, the right job, makes all the difference. Now let's go back and put these things on the van. Thank you for letting me use your spring compressor so that I didn't die. I appreciate
I like
it.
that.
I appreciate it.
Because I'd like you to be around for the next video.
Yeah, because if I'm lame or laid up or something like that, I have to come to you and use my hands.
Yeah, and you're just a camera guy.
I'm just a camera guy. I don't
Not
think you
just
want
another
that.
pretty face.
Scott Armstrong. Thanks, Scott.
No problem.
Well, thank you, Scott. Now we can put the struts back up in the van, put everything back together, put the wheels on, and be done with this part of the operation. See how much easier it was with the right tools? All right, now things have likely moved around a bit since I installed it, but actually I'm seeing that things look like they're right where they're supposed to be. As you can see on the top of this, there's a little FR underneath that mark there, and that indicates that this stud is the one that goes towards the front of the vehicle. And the reason why that's important, you see how this is all offset? It's that way for a reason. If you try to put this in any other way, the whole alignment of the strut will be off. So you got to make sure that you have this lined up the way they want you to have it lined up. And given that the bottom of the strut is here, this should be the front of the vehicle. Now that the nuts are just finger tight up top, the strut will hang in here nicely, and I can maneuver things around to get everything back in place. And these bolts came out this way with the head of the bolt on this side. I'm going to try to just keep with that, so I will install them the same way I saw them come out. Now we're really home free. Now, I know some of you may be wondering if you're going to need alignment after doing this. I often get asked this question about strut replacement. In this case, no. If these bolts were cam bolts, meaning that they were sort of egg-shaped and that when you turn them, it would cause the camber to change. That it would either cause this whole assembly to move in or out. That's a camber adjustment. This does not have a provision for a camber adjustment, so it's just a straight bolt. There's nothing to be done here. So the answer is no, you don't need to worry about the alignment. It's not a bad idea, but honestly, the only thing that's alignable on this vehicle is the toe. So this is the only adjustment you can make to the alignment. If the alignment is off with the camber or the caster, the other two angles besides toe, then you may be able to shift the cradle around a little bit, or you may have just a tiny, and I mean a tiny bit of adjustment here if you loosen these up and move them inward or outward and then tighten these back down. That might help you, but if that doesn't, something else is bent, something else is out of whack. There's another problem that's not necessary. Well, it affects the alignment, but it's not something that you can adjust with the alignment. So there's bent parts, something else somewhere. But I often get asked that, and no, you won't need alignment if you're just replacing struts like this and they're not cam bolts. Now I'm going to tighten up these two 22 millimeter fasteners here, and we're good. And I'm not going to try to push in or out or anything. I'm just going to let it rest the way it is. This is the way I often do it. Now, since my stabilizer link isn't hooked up yet, it actually makes it kind of easy to reach back here and get this ABS line wire. This goes to the ABS wheel speed sensor, by the way, if you're curious. While we're at it, let's just do that stabilizer link. Last but not least, we have the brake line. While you're at it, take a good look at this brake hose. If it shows dry rotting or being cracked around the joints, probably a good time to replace it. There we go. Put our wheel back on. We're done. I know some of you are probably screaming at the screen saying, "You didn't tighten the stuff up top." I'm getting to it, but you can put the wheel and everything back on before you tighten this up. Kind of doesn't matter. I'm gonna try a slightly different setup this time, put my swivel at the top. They sort of hook in the one side and then clip on the other. So look for areas where it's indented for the orientation. All right, that's job done. Let's move to the other side and wrap things up over there. All right, the time has come to reinstall our weather strip here. And it's kind of the same on both sides, but you'll notice that it has two of these placed close together at the ends. And that's how it's laid out here. So you'd really, quite simply, just push them in until you get to the other side. Now we'll close the hood and get this thing back on the ground. Well, that was fun, wasn't it? I'm gonna just come right out and say it. If you don't have quick struts, which are struts that come pre-assembled, or you don't have access to one of those spring compressors like the one over at my friend Scott's garage, I would not even attempt this job in any way. In addition to that, if you don't have compressed air or don't have air tools, and you're trying to use those home spring compressor things, it's even worse with hand tools because you're putting a twisting force on that the whole time. So what happened to me there was is one of those compressors came around to the other side and it just slid around the top of the spring. If you're putting a twisting force on that whole thing, I think that you're going to increase the chances of that happening even more. Also, as far as what struts to use, well, that's up to you. I bought the Honda struts. I like the Honda struts. I know I paid more for the Honda struts. These weren't leaking that much. They were just starting to get to the point where they might be a problem, but as I said, those stabilizer links, those are probably going to give you the biggest fight out of this whole job. So be prepared for that. Look at that video in the description about how I normally deal with those. I would be prepared to buy a set of stabilizer links along with struts if you need to replace the struts. One thing to point out is even though this job was done on a Honda Odyssey, I believe it's virtually the same job if it's like, say, an MDX or a Ridgeline. They're all built on a similar chassis and they all have this exact same strut setup. So if you have one of those vehicles, you could just as easily use the information in this video to do this. Lastly, you do not need an alignment. It's not a bad idea to get an alignment, but as I said, nothing you do here affects any alignment angle that is adjustable on this vehicle. There's only one alignment angle that's adjusted on this vehicle, and that is front end toe. Hang on a minute. You might be able to adjust something in the rear. If I remember right, there might be a cam adjuster on the lower control arm in the back on this. But still, that's got nothing to do with what's going on up front. I hope that information is useful to you. If you have automotive questions, head on over to EricTheCarGuy.com and we have categories listed for you. The most commonly asked questions that I've gotten over the past few years. Written articles on all of it, so all you gotta do is show up at the website, click on one of those categories that's of interest to you, and you just may find an answer to your question right then and there, absolutely free, instantaneously, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Awesome. If that doesn't work, try typing a couple of keywords into our search function. That combs through our database of all the information that we have, including your check engine light codes, by the way. You might get your answer there. If you're still not getting an answer, sign up for our form. It's absolutely free. All you need is a valid email address and to respond to the confirmation email that should end up in your inbox. If you wish to connect with me socially, you can find me at Google+, Facebook, and Twitter. And I close each of my videos with, be safe, have fun, stay dirty.